It's a very great honour for me to welcome you to Imperial College today to celebrate the life and work of Lord Brian Flowers. This is not a religious service, as Brian would have wished. Instead, we're going to hear from friends and colleagues that knew Brian well. Brian often said during his period of rector that this was a shared job between Mary and himself. There'll be many here today that recollect with great fondness the hospitality, kindness, and encouragement shown by Brian and Mary whilst they were here at Imperial. Brian had a reputation for being politically very astute. Apparently, he once said that he had grave concerns about the influence and growing influence of politics on our universities, a topic that remains rather valid today. But Brian did an important thing. He welcomed politicians and people from Westminster into the college to see what was going on and to engage them and to help acquire a sense of ownership of higher education in general and Imperial in particular. This is as important today as it was to Brian then.
Rector, Lady Flowers, friends and colleagues of Brian and Mary, it's a great privilege for me to be able to share with you this afternoon some recollections of Brian, for whom I had the good fortune to work while he was rector. From the moment he rang me to tell me that the job was mine, I knew that I could not have found a kinder or more considerate boss. He immediately made me feel at home, despite my being new to science and engineering, new to university administration, new even to working in Britain, where I'd only ever worked before, as a soldier. A man of towering intellect and great achievement, he nevertheless had the gift of being able to relate easily to whomever he was talking, treating them with understanding and always with great fairness. Whether you were Nobel laureate or office cleaner, you mattered. He took the same thoughtful care with the endless references that he wrote so willingly to help others along in their careers. He gave of himself, of his many talents, and of his great wisdom freely. And his talents were many. They took him from grammar school to Cambridge as an exhibitioner into a sparkling research career in theoretical physics and nuclear energy, earning him authority and status such that his chairmanship of the Science Research Council was inevitable. Just as 6 years later, he was the obvious person to follow Lord Penny as a rector.
The Guardian got it right when it wrote that Brian Flowers was Britain's outstanding scientific and academic administrator of his generation, and that everything he did was characterised by imagination and by his determination to find the right rather than the easy or easily acceptable solution. He believed that although one major purpose of science is the betterment of mankind, another is the proper management of the Earth's resources. Brian had earlier completed a wartime physics degree at Cambridge in 2 years. And he did that with such distinction that John Cockcroft immediately recruited him at age 19 to the Anglo-Canadian atomic bomb project at Chalk River in Canada. 2 years later, in 1946, Cockcroft brought Brian back to work with Otto Frisch's group in the nuclear physics division of the Atomic Energy Research Establishment at Harwell. And for those not familiar with these great names of physics, it's Piles and Frisch, a letter by them that set in train the Manhattan Project during World War II. Piles believed that the significance of this work went so far beyond the normal PhD that Brian emerged with a DSc from Birmingham, and he went back to Harwell to head the theory division and began to show his leadership skills there in restoring the morale that had been shattered by Fuchs' departure. By the time he left in 1958 to take up the chair in theoretical physics at Manchester University, he was already a major international figure in the world of physics. He was elected to the Royal Society at the unusually early age of 36, and in the same year he found himself in charge of all of physics at Manchester as the Langworthy Professor, where he was a very worthy successor to the Nobel laureates Rutherford, Bragg, and Blackett. Well, he continued to contribute imaginative ideas to nuclear physics, but the many demands increasingly made on his time, both in managing a large and experimentally oriented department, and increasingly in other affairs outside Manchester, began to cut into his personal research. And when he became the chairman of the Science Research Council in 1967, it effectively meant the end of his career in physics research, although he continued, of course, to take an interest in the subject. Rudolf Piles's autobiography gives a wonderfully clear-sighted appraisal of Brian's skills. And I extended quote from Piles's Bird of Passage book. He said, "Brian makes decisions easily. He knows that nothing in life is perfect, that you can never find the ideal solution, but you have to accept a good approximation and stick with it. He's good with people, always aware of their problems. If they need help or just warm interest, he and Mary will take great trouble. With these qualities, he rose rapidly in status and responsibility." Piles goes on to praise his leadership at the Science Research Council, a high-level administrative position with great responsibility for the government support of scientific research. And the consequent knighthood produced the following little poem from Rudolf Piles and his wife, which I quote not least because I think it gives some sense of the balance of commitment and playfulness that characterises the best collaborative associations in science. It says, "Endowed by the British Lion with official birthday powers, Her Majesty made you Sir Brian, so Mary becomes Lady Flowers. The aim of our message, quite terse, to express our greatest delight, from lady to lady in verse, and ditto from knight to knight." I conclude by emphasising, as everyone else will, the way in which Brian's intellectual and leadership talents were matched by personal concern and graciousness in everything he did. And I conclude with Piles's words. "In their position, he and Mary have to do a great deal of entertaining, and they do so with the same warmth and consideration, whether the guests are royalty or undergraduates."
I came to the college in 1970. I was in the Department of Zoology and Applied Entomology under Professor Sir Richard Southwood, and we were stationed at the field station at Silwood Park, and were regarded, I think, as country bumpkins. But that changed when Brian arrived. It was soon clear that the new boss at the top in South Kensington intended to be visible. And I remember the long table in the senior common room where Brian presided at lunch, and anyone was free to join and take part in the discussions. Brian famously said about the college, "Imperial College is a very good institution, but not as good as it thinks it is." He wanted to make it better, and in Hannah Gay's words, his persistent prodding moved the college to modernise in a number of fronts. I think the word prodding is exactly right there. Around him was a team of excellent senior administrative staff. Mickey Davis, then John Smith, Peter Mee, John Davidson, Don Clark, the Pro-Rector, Professor John Sutton, and his PA, Linda Davies, keeping everyone in order. And I see some of them here. Needless to say, there were battles, especially over budgets, but conducted, in at least as far as I was concerned, in a fair and transparent manner. Brian arrived at Imperial a year after the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. He was convinced that environmental issues, in particular climate change, were not transient challenges. And it's important to recognize that he was quite clear in his own mind that climate change was coming and we were causing it. This is in the early 1970s. The world needed, he believed, a sustainable pathway for the years ahead. In 1973, he became chair of the Royal Commission on Environmental Pollution, as we've heard. And during his tenure, he oversaw 3 reports on general pollution issues. And then, perhaps the most influential of the reports, the 1976 report on nuclear power and the environment. And here the Commission recommended that there should be a delay in the proposed development of the fast breeder reactor until the problems of handling the extremely dangerous plutonium byproducts have been solved. But in some senses, perhaps what was more important about this report is that he played a key role in opening up the UK's nuclear power programme to more public debate and scrutiny. His experience on the Commission convinced him there was a role for Imperial College in educating a new generation of students about the environment. He was convinced it should be at postgraduate level, building on students' undergraduate specialisations, and it should focus on finding solutions to problems. Sir Richard Salford was highly supportive, as was Professor John Sutton, and the new Centre for Environmental Technology was created in 1976 with an MSc of the same name, and in the first year it attracted 22 students. Brian was very engaged. He even found time to give lectures. And of course they were impeccably crafted, clear and well balanced. Brian said to me he thought if it lasted for 5 years, this centre, it would have done a good job. He was famous for his challenges. The course still runs 34 years later with 150 students each year, and I'm pleased to say I'm back on the staff. Brian's leadership and authority were crucial in the creation of the centre. I remember during the Senate discussions, one professor accused the proposal of being pap for popinjays. Brian would have none of that and gave him short shrift. I also remember that Brian chaired my promotion committee. And there was a moment when members of the committee criticised me for not having published enough on pure ecology. Brian cut in. Are you saying that he behaves like an engineer? If so, I want you to remember that we hold our engineers in high esteem at Imperial. He was a man of strong principles and great integrity, and he carried these values into politics in the creation of the Social Democrats, the SDP. And as Lord Mayor has mentioned already, he was a member of the Lord's Science and Technology Committee for nearly 20 years. And it was during that period, again as Bob has said, that he was influential in creating the Government Office of Science and Technology, which in turn created the network of chief scientists. That has now blossomed to the point at which there is a chief scientist in every government department except the Treasury. And I leave you to conclude what you will about that. Imperial appears to the newcomer to be a formidable place. Brian and Mary worked with considerable success to make it a more family-friendly place. 170 Queen's Gate, the residence, became a place for lively dinners, often attracting prominent figures, including government ministers. Many in the audience here will recall those evenings. 170 was also the venue for for student beer and bangers, and also the annual Christmas party, which my daughters remember with great affection. The children would arrive as Mary was blowing up the balloons and laying out plates of the kind of goodies that children adore. Brown and Mary were a great team, and when Susan and I went to Sussex, we tried to follow their example. They periodically came to stay at Swanborough Manor, and I benefited from his advice on the issues I was facing. He was generous and principled, quick to analyse the context, and usually urging me to stand firm on whatever issue it was. Susan and I saw him just a few days before he died. We sat in the sunshine munching his favourite chocolate biscuits as he reminisced about the college, interspersing his remarks with gritty comments about the state of the world and the ever-present wry sense of humour. And I'll finish on one well-known example of that. When he was Vice-Chancellor of London, he appeared highly assiduous at taking detailed notes in all the committee meetings. Everybody was very impressed. And then it transpired he was writing pieces of computer program for his next textbook. His comment was, "It was an enjoyable holiday, immensely relaxing, and less visible than other portable pastimes, such as wood carving and taking snuff."